on to our panel and our last event of the day. So I'll introduce our speakers, and then the floor will be open to all of you to ask questions. So as they take their seats, please feel free to come and sit down. I'll tell you a little about them, and then we can open up to questions. I'll give them some time to sit down too. So this panel session is about addressing organizational processes and structures with equality and diversity and inclusion programs. So our panelists will discuss their institution's work and review with the audience. So some interesting questions. We have Professor Michael Dennin, who has been Professor of Physics and Astronomy at UCI since 1997, and is now the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning, and is the Dean at Division of Undergraduate Education. We have Dr. Emelyn Dela, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Dean of the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at Washington University. We've lost that university in St. Louis. We have Dr. Russell Loveridge, who is Managing Director of the Swiss National Center of Competence in Research in Digital Fabrication at ETH Zurich. And we have Laurent Roux, who's joined the European Institute of Innovation and Technology as an Entrepreneurship Officer in September 2013. So why don't we start with some questions about how everyone is so eager. It will be exciting. This is quite an exciting topic, I think, about the organizational processes. Or maybe not. Would you like to start, Russell?
Why don't we start with some stories?
Right. Okay, stories are good.
You know, maybe it's actually up to us to animate the discussion here today.
Excellent.
So thank you all for staying right to the very, very last. You know, it's the end of an incredibly long and very full day. I have something to admit to you, and that's that I don't come to this conference with any expertise or answers. I'm actually really much here looking for assistance with our own difficulties. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Russell Loveridge. I'm the Managing Director of what's called an NCCR, a National Center of Competence in Research. And in the context of this conference, I have the dubious honor of being the Managing Director of a very large group of researchers who research technology in construction. So construction is the main goal of what we do, and construction is a traditionally gender-biased field. Now, on top of that, we have 8 research disciplines. We have construction engineering, we've got robotics, we've got computer science, we've got material systems, we've got control systems engineering. So we have a number of research areas which are all, in addition, traditionally male, gender-biased areas of research. And when you take one thing and multiply it by another thing, the resulting Venn diagram is a bunch of guys who are very much interested in technology in construction. So I'm here today because clearly we need to address this topic. At the same time, I'm also very aware that the construction industry, at least, has been gender biased for millennia, typically because of its view as being a very physically labor-intensive process. Yet we are studying the intervention of digital technologies into this process and the replacement of physical labor with mechatronic labor. So we ask ourselves, why can this not be completely a parity-based research project? There's no fundamental historical reason for us to keep up this paradigm. So I'm here to ask everybody, including my fellow panelists, what they think about this, and please lay your solutions on me. Who's next?
Is this on? Oh, it is on.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. So I prepared a lot more remarks than I'm actually going to say because most of the speakers and the panelists have already talked a lot about what I wanted to say today. But I think that the one thing that I do want to spend some time on is this issue about retaining the diversity that we already have in the pipeline. We've already heard about the issues about getting people into the pipeline, attracting more women and underrepresented minorities into STEM fields. And so that it becomes even more important that the few that we do have, that we're able to keep them and graduate them and retain them in the field even after they've graduated. And the one thing that I want to emphasize that I've heard over and over again through the other speakers is that we need to take affirmative steps to make this happen. And that taking an approach that is gender neutral and colorblind suggests that our current systems were created in a vacuum, absent of purposeful discrimination and bias that created these systems meant to perpetuate those unequal systems. And Dr. Fatma Mili talked about that a little bit earlier. And then Dr. Irvine talked about this propensity of ours to reproduce our systems of social sameness. And so I wanted to reinforce that studies in implicit bias reveal that in a system that is already biased and where inequity exists, we cannot rely on the goodwill of individuals to change those systems. And that because of legacies of past and present bias and discrimination that have created structural and institutional barriers, that it will take more than the reduction of implicit bias and the goodwill of individuals to remedy those barriers. And so we really have to pay attention to what our speakers are saying around instituting larger scale structural and institutional interventions. And so, this is why we, we're in a conference hall full of international and private organizations that have invested millions of dollars in science diversity programs. And one of the, I think what I've seen in terms of the strands of solutions and conversations that we've been having, particularly in higher education, where my field is that the conversations are either talking about culture within the disciplines, which I think Professor Dennin, you said that you wanted to touch upon, or they're focusing on the climate of institutions, but rarely do we talk about those two things at the same time and in collaboration with each other, and I think both are very important. And so because you said you would touch on the culture of science itself, or the field itself, I want to talk a little bit about campus climate, which is where my area is in terms of the work that I do at Washington University. And when I talk about campus climate, I'm talking about the attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and perceptions of community members, as well as the environment itself. So for example, physical markers on a college campus that would indicate whether you belong in that institution. And our work on campus climate tells us that persistent encounters with stereotypes rooted in sexism, in racism, in marginalization diminish the quality of the educational experience for our students. And students of color, particularly Black students, rate campus climates as more hostile than their peers, and women are more likely to perceive a negative racial climate than men, and which we've seen in many of the slides that we've already, that other speakers have shown us today. And this has been a consistent trend in campus climate surveys, which my office is responsible for at Washington University in St. Louis. And so one of the things that one of the interventions, or one of the many interventions that we have at WashU, is to think about how we create a climate of belonging for our students. Because if we can create a climate of belonging in a sense of a sense that you are welcome campus-wide, not just in the STEM fields, I think that goes a long way into creating a culture where even the STEM departments can start to create a culture of belonging. And so I want to quote Sarah Ahmad, because she said something in one of the lectures that I attended that stayed with me for a very long time, and I wanted to sure to get it right. She says, and she's a feminist scholar and author, that an institution is like an old garment. It has acquired the shape of those who tend to wear it, such that it becomes easier to wear if you have that shape. And earlier, one of our speakers talked about how our systems were created to be inequitable, that they were not created for people like me. And so if you think about an ill-fitting suit, for example, I could wear it, but it's not comfortable. I could make it fit, but it doesn't belong on me. And so part of the work that we do in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion is to really tease out the nuance between fitting in at an institution and really having a sense of belonging in the institution. And I think that that is a very important distinction that we have to start talking about.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next speaker, maybe we could have a question from the audience? Maybe a microphone? Sorry, just in the fourth row. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Hi, thank you for starting off with this really important point. So, so what you just said, it resonates with what I was thinking. Throughout the discussion today, we have talked about how to remove implicit bias, explicit bias. We have also talked about how to change the culture of our institution, of a university. And as you were saying, how to change the culture around the construction industry, let's say. But we haven't talked about how we have actually built implicit bias onto ourselves. So just to give an example, when I talk about gender in physics, for example, I talk about how gender of the particular gender of a particular gender is not always highlighted. For example, Emi Noether is a very big physicist, female physicist, who has been through such a lot, and her contributions can be said to be rivaling Einstein's. But because her picture is never next to her name, or her gender is never next to, there's Noyce's theorem, but nobody ever said it's her theorem. She did this work, or she had to face this. So till I was in my final year of my second master's, I never knew that she was a female. And due to my implicit bias, which had been built into me because of these non-gendered sentences, I had assumed that she's a man. And these are little things which for example, I was also, another thing I was saying today to somebody else when I was talking, that we give role models to females and males who are essentially males. For example, let's say Einstein, Gandhi, Newton, we can talk about many male role models, but there are things that they have done towards females or minorities, which we kind of very slowly brush under the carpet, and they are told, but then they're brushed under the carpet. So this kind of gives us a subtext, which even though we read the same text, me and the boy next to me, we learn completely different things. So I learned that I can have these kind of male role models, even though they do these things to females. And the guy next to me learns that, oh, I can be such a role model and still do these things towards females. Then there is a talk about language in a media or in an university, where we talk about sexual assault towards minorities or discrimination against minorities. But we do not talk about this person did this discrimination against somebody, or this man sexually assaulted this woman or this person. So this kind of loses our focus on who actually did it, rather than makes victimization very easy to do. Another thing which I'd like to talk to you, maybe as a pun, is that for we do not really talk about how constructions of our cities, our buildings, are essentially gendered. There is a visual and a aesthetic aspect to what draws in different kind of demographics, and essentially because in the history of our society, of the world, this demographic has been, let's say, the eccentric white man, or the straight white man, and this has always been appealing towards a particular demographic. And for example, in office spaces, the little things like the temperature of an office space make such a huge difference, because it again brings into a thing that Professor Fatima in the morning was talking about, this power gap. Some of us would not be able to tell that we would not be able to sit in the office because the temperature is slightly too low for us. So we would either put 3 different sweaters on the back of our chairs, or we will slightly leave the office very slowly so as not to disturb others, because we would think that raising a voice against such things are just very not too important. So I'm wondering what kind of things can be done to make sure these kind of small little things are actually heard, so that we do not build up a succession of implicit bias and succession of even larger power gap, rather than coming back again at the end saying that let's try to, what I'm saying is prevention is better than cure. So let's try to do that. And I want to ask what we can do about it. Yeah.
Would you like to go
Thank you for the comments. I think I'll take these 2 points on the media and then the gendered innovation. So my name is Laurent Roux. I work for the EIT, European Institute of Innovation and Technology. We are an agency of the European Commission. We invest a large portion of the Horizon 2020 budget in innovation across Europe. We've already built the largest innovation ecosystem. We have more than 1,000 partners in sectors like raw materials and energy, some traditionally very unbalanced sectors. So we are now really, so we build these ecosystems, and now we're looking at how to really gender mainstream our activities and our investment. And I think some of the speakers this morning from the UK government and also the Dutch government, the agencies, they are doing the same thing, really looking at trying to remove the barriers in how proposals are evaluated, investment are being made, so that everybody gets the same chance and we work with partners from research, academia, and business, so really the 3 sides of the knowledge triangle. On the media question, this is also something we pay very much attention to, how we present ourselves, our calls are published, the images we use on our websites, on social media, how we really try to not create more biases just by this imaging. So this is something that, and also the newsletters, the wording, how we call for experts and so on, really to try to make it a very level playing field. And on the gender innovation aspect, or you say that some products obviously have a bias because they were created by an unbalanced team, or also diversity, not just male and female, but not a diverse team in terms of origin, in terms of training and so on. So this is something that now we're also trying to really pay attention to put additional funding towards gender innovation, because it's more opportunities, it's more markets, it's a lot of products that have not been created that they're not fully adapted to the consumers, both male and female, or from different backgrounds. So this is something that at the European level we are really trying to address. We cannot fix decades and centuries of these biases that have been introduced, but we can try to, with the money we're investing now, we can try to at least not amplify what is already there, but try to correct it slowly but surely. So I think that this is what we can contribute from the European Commission.
Would you also like to comment, Russell? Maybe Professor Dennin? Would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an answer. So, Michael Dennin from UC Irvine, and I think you raise one of those interesting challenges, particularly when I think about this from the organizational and structural issue within the university, which is the following situation that we're always trying to balance and deal with. And I think you've seen it in a number of the talks, which is, on the one hand, we would love to move to a place where you've minimized the structural biases and implicit bias and structural issues as much as you can. And that's one type of work, and it takes a certain amount of energy and creativity and process, and it's future prevention. On the other hand, you recognize that in this moment in time, you're both in an institutional with structural biases and challenges, and you have students who are about to start and have 4 years to get through that institution, right? And so in that space, knowing that you can't cure both whatever they're bringing to the place and what you have, you're in a weird prevention state where what you're trying to do is help them get through this very imperfect system. And that in itself is also almost a full-time job. And if you spend the effort you need to get your current crop of students through this imperfect system, that takes away from the work of fixing the systems. And if you spend the time fixing the systems, you risk losing the current students. So it's an interesting space to work in right now. It involves marshaling even more resources. And it risks creating, in my mind, excuses to avoid one or the other. We need to figure out, it has to be a both and. It can't be you pick one in favor of the other. So from my perspective, when I look at it, in the talk I gave earlier, there's a number of reasons, therefore, I've been trying to think very creatively about the culture in the classroom. Because it is both the place where the current students are going to have to succeed, so I want to get them through that. But it's also the place, in principle, where it's done right, where you're educating the next generation of students who will hopefully come out with a completely different view of the way the structure should be. So it seems to me to be a nexus where you can both be working on a future solution and helping the current students get through. About that, I'm curious what other people's reactions to that are. But I see the classroom as a dramatic opportunity for this to occur.
And just to complement on this, so beyond the classroom, what we have in our programs is we have the Alumni Association with thousands of students that have gone to different programs around Europe, the same kind of programs, and they continue. So even if they're not fully on board during their studies, they, as a community, they will adopt these values of diversity and support from each other and across Europe. So this is how we use our EIT Alumni Association across Europe to continue the work and then connect them, and then they become influencers in their respective industry. Some of them in very traditionally, as I said, or you said also, construction, raw materials, energy fields that are very, very still unbalanced. But they will hopefully make a change in 5 years, 10 years time, because they've had this culture ingrained in them, for lack of a better term, through their studies and also through the EIT Alumni Association.
Great. Shall we go on to another question? And then just a...
Yeah, Chris Pauly, Maastricht University. I like the analogy about our institutions being the garments worn over many generations. I have another analogy. Our institutes are like huge graveyards that are over capacity. And to make any progress on equality, it's much like needing to move the graveyard. You don't get much help from the people inside of it. So we're all here, it's great. We've all got a lot of enthusiasm for this topic. There's a lot of people from all over the world, but it's very much preaching to the converted, right? Nobody here needs to be convinced of the importance. Nobody here has any buy-in. So how do we really go back to our institutions and motivate our colleagues who maybe are not reluctant, but they're also not finding the advantage or finding it necessary to do these things that we find important in our practice, and especially from an organizational level, how can the organization motivate people with an appropriate stick so that they buy into these processes too?
So, I would just like to say that, I work with a lot of folks who are very good-hearted and want to create, structural change. But I think sometimes what gets in our way is our sense of equality and fairness, right? And so we institute things that on the surface are equal or treat everyone equally, but have disproportionate negative effects on marginalized populations if we're not careful about how we look at them. So for example, we had a student at Washington University. Everyone who takes Gen Chem has to purchase a lab coat. On the surface, everyone's treated the same. Everyone has to purchase a lab coat. We had a student who simply could not afford a lab coat and had to put off taking their Gen Chem class. And so if we're not careful about looking how our colorblind and neutral policies disproportionately affect those who are already marginalized, we're going to let those fall through the cracks, even as we all have goodwill to pull together these programs and to go to these conferences and to have these discussions. Our tenure policies, for example, when they're gender neutral, disproportionately affect women because women are the ones who are ones having, when families happen, they're the ones that are staying home, they're the ones that have to stop their tenure clock. And so if we don't have a critical eye on our gender neutral policies, then we will disproportionately negatively affect women in our faculty pipeline, right? And so I think part of what we have to do is to examine what is the difference between equality and equity.
I'd like to pick up on two words that have just been used a couple of times. The first one was the word culture. So our research group was started in 2014. We were given the mandate to be something radical, so something very different, which meant that we really also were able to build up a research culture from within. And although we built it up on essentially the existing cultures, we were also given the mandate we're given 4 mandate actually. One is industry transfer, the second is communications, the third one is education, and the fourth one, of course, is equality and advancement of women in science. So from the very beginning, we knew we could start off by trying to do something different, but at the same time we were, or not but, and at the same time we were also trying to start up something which was highly interdisciplinary, highly multidisciplinary, and basically we had to start off by building a culture where even people speaking the same linguistic language weren't speaking the same professional language. And that fact that we had to get people to talk to each other in a different way across disciplines also gave us the opening to get people to talk to each other across the more challenging items. The second word that was used earlier was the stick, and thank you for using it, because how do I put this? I come from Switzerland. We have very healthily funded research. We operate at the PhD and postdoc and above levels. So the people within our groups are A, quite well funded, and B, they are at the appropriate age where the balance between work and family life is a significant issue. But one of the things that we learned very quickly in setting up this institution is that you cannot work with the stick. It simply doesn't work. If people are comfortable enough, then you have to work with the carrot. And so what has been the challenge for me for the last 5 years, especially in this area, is finding what are the carrots to get people who subscribe to older paradigms to change their views, or to at least be open to a broader approach to these views, and what new and interesting carrots can we find which can open things up further. I'll give you a very clear example. The question of excellence versus equality. Our institute has a very specific approach to this, that we always choose excellence first, always. But people up high, the president's office, and people who have a certain amount of power also have enough funding that if it comes to the choice between an excellent male candidate and even a slightly less qualified female candidate, we hire both. And we make place for that. Another very good example is in role models. In the first years of our group, we were criticized by our review panel that we had too many male leaders. Of course, we have too many male leaders. We're talking about construction and robotics and all of these male-dominated areas. So we took it upon ourselves to build up role models from within with the knowledge that they would graduate and they would find ways to become better. How did we do this? We identified people already within our organization who were offered the opportunity to take on more responsibility. They were offered, they were not told, but they were offered more responsibility. And when they took it, they were then graduated and promoted. Now we have, after 4 years, we have a number of graduating PhD women. And there is typically a policy at universities of saying that after a PhD, maybe it's a really good idea to go out in the world and do a postdoc somewhere else so that you can find out more information about your field and basically broaden your own horizons. But going back to this age issue, at this age, you're also maybe embedded in a family, you may be embedded with children, your husband may have an excellent job geographically in that area, so pushing them away is a bad idea. So this is another area where we promote role models by building up people within our organizations, both men and women, I might say, but we then expect them to follow through in bringing this culture more widely through the group.
Okay, thank you. Let's get one more question from Dr. Malcolm in the fourth row. Thank you. And then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Shirley Malcolm, AAAS. As I listen to the discussion, I think that we are still stuck in our paradigms. I don't think that you can basically talk about excellence versus equity, because quite frankly, if it's not equitable, it's not excellent. Can anybody think about it that way? Not the other way, that way. That in fact, that if it is not equitable, It's not, by definition, it's not excellent, because we understand now a lot more about the role of perspective within research, and therefore lacking it, you're not as good as you think you are. And I think that there's a question about how we narrowly define what excellence is. And we look at two candidates, for example, and what are we counting? What is it that we're looking at? Are we looking at the fact that this person has more papers than this one, or this person has more high-impact papers than this one, or that this person did this incredible work in spite of what the institution did, or in spite of what she did not have, or in spite of the fact that she didn't have the space or the same money or what have you. So I think that there is we're stuck in some paradigms. The other part is that oftentimes in our conversations, we devolve into discussions of individuals. What is happening to this person versus that person versus the other person? When science is going in the other direction toward teams and what is happening in the interaction among people. And there, if they're all alike, you don't have much to work from in terms of drawing out excellence. And I think that, you know, like in the discussion about like spousal or partner interactions, it's always the kind of thing, well, she follows him rather than he follows her, or he follows him, or she follows her. I mean, I think that that if we don't basically unconnect the structures that we are so used to living with, that the ones that have basically characterized our past, that we're going to be stuck in terms of reinventing our future.
So thank you for that, because that helps with, I was going to answer the other question, and I think they go together. You know, your question about how do you motivate those who don't seem to be engaged in the conversation? And going to, Shirley, what you just said, the way I kind of put the two together is I heard a talk a couple weeks ago, and I really feel bad. I can never remember anybody's name. I don't remember what the speaker's name was. But they basically made the point, when it came to technology, no institution gave people the option about whether to accept it or not. You basically had to start using email. You had to start using the internet. And if you look at the transition from not having technology in our universities to having it, despite the number of people who complained or required, we had people in our department who needed someone to read their email for them and print it out because they didn't want to deal with the computer. We are now at a point where we all have technology. And so why are we letting people get away with not having diversity? Right? Why do we not just, never mind a carrot or a stick, we just say that this is it now. And going back to your comment on FAIR, whenever FAIR comes up, I don't know why I have a weird reaction to it, but I think it's all the years of having listened to my dad tell me life isn't fair, right? Like, it's just not, right? Life isn't fair, and yet we in academics try and create this illusion that our classrooms are fair, and they're just not. And having that honest conversation, I think just has to happen. And for me, I'll just repeat one quick thing that I did share in my talk. The breakthrough moment was I spent many wonderful years with my 3 daughters coaching soccer. And then even being on the board and on I think the best preparation for administration and academics was when I was in charge of selecting the teams for the AYSO Extra and having all the parents come to me and complain about their kid not getting picked. Because most of those complaints are the same I get now, only it's about not getting money for your program. It's kind of the same complaint. But it goes to your comment about how do we define excellence, right? My argument was youth soccer parents define excellence as the kid who scores the most goals. But a soccer team needs more than somebody who can score goals, right? And what we're looking for is excellent soccer players, not excellent strikers. And I would argue in academics, we have focused on excellence defined narrowly by a certain characteristic, which is excellent, It's just a narrow definition of excellent. And I think the challenge for humans, I would love to hear from psychologists and people who understand this better than me and sociologists, is the colleagues we're talking to, I think, have trouble getting past the fact that if I broaden the definition of excellence, I have not lessened their excellence. I think that's the innate human fear, right? If I'm asking you to expand your definition of excellence, it gets translated as asking you to lower the value of your own excellence, which I'm not asking to do at all. I'm asking you to expand the definition of excellence and raise the level of others, not lower yours. And I think that's a conversation that we have to have with our colleagues and help them understand. It's not a threat to their excellence, it's a raising of everybody else's excellence. And they can then do better in the team that gets formed. And so I think that's part of the answer to your question, is understanding the fears and challenges so that we can have the conversations with those who are not hearing the conversation. It's just a guess, but I think it can work.
Can I just add 2 points to this, because the thing is
very
interesting, and then one maybe in terms of with the IT. So we're not funding research; we're really funding innovations. We are close to or on the market with the projects and teams and startups and scale-up we support. So I think the market is going to also to punish the companies that are not diverse, that are not producing good product services coming from diversity. So I think the market will take care of some of that, and then maybe that will be a stick or a carrot for the producers of these, the talent that is coming out of the universities that are becoming professional. So I think the market can take care of some of that. The other thing too, last week we had the annual Eit Awards, which is the European level competition for best talent in startup innovation projects. And also, so the overall winner for this competition, which was 38 nominees from all across Europe, was actually a woman. So, and voted by the public on the internet. So it's not, so maybe it's a ray of hope for everybody. So the European, let's say, Innovator of the Year in our world, in the IT world, is a woman for 2018. So I think, and then because she's excellent, because she's having an impact through her work, and not only in terms of money, but also in the community and how she's a role model for others and so on. So I think, and the public recognized that at the European level.
I do want to add one thing to Dr. Malcolm, what you said in terms of when we don't have equality, that not only is it not excellent, it's harmful. So when I think, for example, about the design of airbags in cars that didn't include women in the design process, it killed women because we're shorter and we drive closer to the steering wheel. And so when we didn't account for that in the design of the airbags, it started killing women, right? And so I really do want to reinforce that. And then just one final point on this issue about fairness. It's not about making everything fair for people, but I think it's about removing unnecessary barriers that have nothing to do with technical mastery, right? If it has nothing to do with technical mastery, why do we create barriers where there doesn't need to be?
Thank you very much. Let's maybe we can take that outside, because we're all going to get together anyway. We're having drinks and canapes outside. So please bring your questions with our delegates and a drink in your hand, and thank them very much for right now. That was great. Thank you.